So far in this lesson, we've been focused on code snippets to introduce various control statements and some of the augmented assignment capabilities. Here we're going to take a look at a script that does a calculation of a class average. So let's assume that we have 10 students who took an exam, and these are the grades we were given that we would like to sum up and calculate the average of. So we've created a script to do that. Now, I do want to talk about this script in detail. First, however, let me go ahead and run the program so that you can see the result. So I'm going to switch over to my terminal window here, and you can see I'm already in the folder that has the script file, which is fig03_01.py. So I'm going to use the IPython command to execute that, and when I do, it will sum up the numbers, calculate the average, and display the class average, which in this case came out to 81.7. And we do have a new formatting capability that we're going to introduce as part of this script as well. So as we did in some of the snippets in the preceding videos, whenever we want to total up a bunch of values, we generally need a total variable to help us determine what that sum of the values is. So we start out by initializing that to 0. And in this example, we've also created a separate variable called grade counter and initialized it to 0, because as we work our way through totaling up the numbers, we're going to keep track of how many items are added to the total, which will help us with calculating the class average. Now, as we get into lists in more detail later on, you're going to see that lists know their own length, so we don't really need to keep track of the number of grades. We could have gotten that directly from the list of grades that I am creating here at line 7. So this is the first time that we've taken a list of elements, which is the square bracketed set of values separated by commas, and assigned it to a variable. So grades is actually a list of integers because each of the items in this list happens to be an integer. Now remember, the for iteration statement knows how to process any sequence of values, anything that is what we call an iterable. Strings are iterable, lists are iterable, and as you'll see, there's a lot of other things that can be processed as iterables in for loops as well. So for each of the grades, for each grade in the list grades is a better way to read that. For each grade in the list grades, I want to add to the total whatever the current grade is. So initially it'll be 98, then 76, then 71, then 87, and eventually we'll get to the point of having processed all of the items in the grades list, at which point this loop will terminate. But as long as I have a next grade to process, we'll add it to the total, and we will add 1 to the grade counter variable. Now, those of you coming from other C-based languages may be familiar with the plus operator for adding 1 to a variable. Python does not have that particular operator. So we'll iterate, in this case 10 times, because there are 10 items in the list. We'll sum up the values of the grades. We'll count how many grades there are as we are going. So we have 2 different statements in our suite, and in each case those statements are preceded by 4 spaces each, so we have uniform indentation, which is required in Python. Then we're going to calculate the class average down here by using the division operator. Now, you may recall from back in lesson 2 that when you use a single /, the result is always a floating point number, which is a little different from how things work in many other C-based languages. In most C-based languages, when you divide one integer, the total, by another integer, the grade counter, you get an integer result. But in Python, when you use this operator, you always get a floating point result. So we're going to get the class average as a floating point number, and we're introducing for the very first time here what is known as an F string. This was a new feature that was added in Python 3.6, And what it does is it enables you to insert values directly into strings for the purpose of formatting. So F strings are still strings, but they're preceded by the lowercase letter f to indicate that it's a format string, and they can contain these placeholders in curly braces, which are for replacement text. So basically what's going to happen here is the value of the variable average, which we just calculated up above, will replace this highlighted expression in curly braces and will then be output as part of the string that print displays. So it just basically inserts a value. Now we're going to see in subsequent examples that these format strings can also contain formatting information. So for example, if you wanted to make sure that the average was displayed with 3 digits to the right of the decimal point, you can specify that as part of this placeholder when you are defining your format string, and then the interpreter will apply the appropriate formatting for you. So as you saw, we inserted the average into this string, and going back to the output for a moment, you can see the result in this particular case was 81.7.